Good evening, TheoTrade. This is Corey Rosenblum, and you're watching the Theo Nightly video for the 19th of April here in 2022. I'm not going to bury the lead here. I'm going to get right to it. Big news of the after hours isn't really IBM. It's Netflix. So here is the intraday chart of Netflix. We'll take this up. This is a 1-minute chart of Netflix. This is a daily chart of Netflix. It closed, was actually up on the session, about 348, almost 350 a share. Key support level on the daily chart, 325. Earnings came out, and they're down to 276. So we will have to push this chart even lower, and we'll go to a weekly chart, a weekly perspective to see that, things could change after hours. This is coming to you right after the market closes, right after that bell, with the earnings in Netflix. So you'll have time to read over those if you want to do that. That'll be on the Analyze tab. Here's the fundamentals for Netflix and all the recommendations. Of course, the earnings, you'll be able to see that as it plays out. They'll update that a little bit later here in thinkorswim. And you can look at the news on Netflix, which is coming out right now. So there are the reports, of course, the earnings and any analyst reports or flash headlines that you might be interested in for going into Wednesday session. So here is the weekly chart. Again, this can change quickly. But at the moment, shares trade about 275 per share, and that puts the price right down to here. Levels not seen since 2019 and the latter part of 2018. So that will be something to watch very carefully if you're positioned, if you're hedged, or if you're looking to put positions on now that earnings are behind us. We'll take a look quickly at the Qs. Those will trade a little after hours, and might even see how the Nasdaq is pulled down at least a little bit by Netflix, and of course the Nasdaq futures themselves. That'll be the headline. That's the top of the story. That's the top of the report, but there are other things happening in today's market. Starting with the big picture on the daily chart, this is your S&P 500, and it was up. All markets actually were up about 1.25%, but the big mover was the Russell, the small cap. That's your RTY. And that's also, if you trade the ETF, that's the IWM. So that's the reference into that in terms of the Russell, the IWM. Of course, we look at implied volatility, anything else you might look at for those. And of course, outside the IWM, you can look at the spiders, which is SPY, and the share prices on those. And of course, we mentioned the Qs earlier. Individual sectors are still in play. The strongest sector in today's session actually was the Y, which is XLY. That's consumer discretionary. And which stock led the market up today? Nike was a big one. Amazon's the big one that punched the XLY to the upside. But also Disney. Think about that as a potential retail name. Netflix tricked the market with a little 3% gain today. Other stocks would include Ford and down the list. So other stocks did have earnings, so I don't want to let those go before we focus exclusively on Netflix. So Lockheed Martin, it also had earnings, again, just for the purpose of the video, just getting you up to speed with what's going on. You can always get a little more information if you have trades on particularly, or if you want to read the news or what the earnings were. If you're interested in going a little bit more into the data and what positions may come of those. But Lockheed Martin had their earnings, and the stock was down. Here's their hourly chart, and the daily chart down about 1.6%. Johnson & Johnson had earnings today, and that was a little bit more volatile, which pushed to the upside, but then traded down from that 186 level. Just saw Netflix, and here's one that we haven't talked about yet. So let's look at IBM and how they're reporting. That is your intraday chart. Let's take that down. If you want to see the after hours, go to equities. We'll take the volume off. And then show your extended hours. We'll highlight those. Now that is a completely different picture of what happened after earnings. So IBM, not an amazing or stellar push to the upside, but nonetheless, the stock is trading higher. And in percent change, that's roughly about 3.6%. And that's in line with some of the other names and their performance in today's update in the broader market. Reporting tomorrow is going to be Abbott Laboratories, Procter & Gamble, and then the big one. I'll put a emphasis right here, Tesla. So Tesla will report earnings after the bell on Wednesday. So we might not expect as big of a move as what we saw in Netflix. And a quick update on it. It is trading lower just a few minutes after we discussed it. It's down about the 270 per share level. Now, outside of those, I know it's a lot to look at and cover quickly, but crude oil was down 5% today. And that is a push down from the 110 level. And for me on the volume profile, just a quick update, that's above with a mean reversion move to the downside. Contrast that with the stock market or equity futures, which had a mean reversion move from under the profile, under bought or oversold, back to the middle, which is the mean or the midpoint. Nasdaq did that too. The Dow finished the day above our distribution, and the Russell finished from the lower bound to the upper bound and potentially trades back inside. We very well might see and may see the equity futures continue a little slide to the downside into Wednesday's session. And we'll have new home sales reporting tomorrow morning. But other than that, it's going to be a focus mainly on technology and Netflix. And of course, digging a little deeper into those numbers after the close and how that affects the Nasdaq being a technology sector. And you can visualize that over here with the heat map. And Netflix, not a huge stock over here, can barely see it over in the technology sector, but it's going to play off into the Nasdaq. It counts as a communication services. It's not a big monster of tech. It's $154 billion of market cap. In the S&P, we see Netflix is somewhere in this area over here. So there it is. The communication services. Netflix is right here, right next to Disney, Comcast, Charter, and Verizon, AT&T, but also big market cap names, Google, and a formerly big, still big, but not as big as it used to be, not $1 trillion, and that's Facebook. So those stocks clearly in focus as we go throughout this week. Of course, the bond market was a little bit weaker in today's session. We'll show that on the daily chart. Crude was weaker. Gold traded down. I think a key level to watch for it, for all traders, short-term and longer, is the 2,000 per ounce level on the futures contract. That was a gap to the upside, and that was rejected with a sell swing down to about 1950. Again, that concept of mean reversion, we'll look at that on the profile, did take place. So that mean reversion, something that is overbought or over fair valuation, does have a better shot or probability to trade back down. Something that is undervalued or under profiles or under fair valuation does have a little better odds to trade back to the upside. That being said, the bond market continues to slide lower. We're not seeing mean reversion, at least yet, in the bond market as seen by TLT. And that is in large part multiple factors, but the Federal Reserve is looking to push a little more aggressively on the raising of interest rates. Of course, the bond market themselves is in a continued downtrend, and that's new lows on the chart. We'll actually pull back to a weekly perspective. New lows in the ZN, again, futures contract, not seen since about 2018, early part of 2019. TLT would be a similar level. That's an ETF, not a continuous futures contract, so a little bit different there. And of course, ZB is your 30-year Treasury bond. On the upside, the flip side, the exact opposite of the bonds going down is yield, Treasury yield. Going to the upside, that's your 10-year Treasury yield. And that is something to continue to watch. At the beginning of 2022, the interest rate, 10-year Treasury note, the yield, traded around 1.5%. In those first few months of this new year, as we approach relatively the middle of 2022, not far from now, the bond market, the yield has gone from 1.5% and it pushes close to 3%. And that will have ripple effects throughout the economy and different sectors of the economy. And of course, individual stocks will be caught up in this interest rate surge or major rally, which is again the bond market trading down to lows. All this to be considered. We still have earnings. Again, Netflix will come up. Netflix was today. Tesla comes up tomorrow. But then outside of those, Union Pacific, AT&T, Dow Chemical, Danaher, Philip Morris, NextEra Energy, and a few others, including Coca-Cola and Pepsi, will take place a little bit later. As always, be careful and safe. This is Corey Roseblum with tonight's Theo video update for April 19th, 2022.